has.
All right, stand by.
Count us in. We're good.
Okay. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good evening. Welcome to the Wednesday, June 12th, 2024 Middle School Building Committee meeting. This meeting will be a hybrid meeting, both in person and on the web. So call the meeting to order. The first thing on the agenda tonight is going to be public comments. I have 15 minutes for public comments. Anybody who wishes to give public comments will be given 3 minutes to do so. After the 15 minutes are up, the agenda will move on to the next point of the agenda, which would be correspondence. Just like to remind everybody that this is a public meeting, but it is not a meeting of the public, which that means is that comments are welcomed. I love having comments from the community. It helps us as we move forward and make decisions and recommendations, but this is not a back and forth. So there will be no responses to comments or answers to any questions that come up during public comment period. The other thing that I would invite is if there's a group that has any kind of public comments they'd like to make, if there's a group representative and they make themselves known, that's fine as well. But I will now open it up for public comment. Please use the microphone at the head of the table, and thank you for being here tonight.
This one?
That's perfect.
Hi, I'm Bill DiGiulio, 8 Woodside Drive. I'm going to make this quick and I'm going to talk fast. So I think all of us are going to get to know one another in the coming weeks and months. We all just found out in the last 2 weeks that the committee here has narrowed the choices pretty much down to just the William Street site. And this came as a shock, I think, to everybody in here, all of our neighbors, but we have a lot of concerns, okay? We understand that schools and quality of life, small town atmosphere, this is what brings people to Long Meadow. And putting a new school on the William Street athletic fields, or even rebuilding where the old school is, well, that's going to solve the education issue. It's going to destroy the quality of life for at least 10 to 15 of the surrounding streets. And this is hundreds of homes. And I say this because the current site was built for a middle school of about 300 to 350 students. And the size of that lot, which is a little less than, I believe, 15 acres, is appropriate for a school of 300 to 400. But if you go and you start looking at there is no Massachusetts requirement, minimum space requirement for middle schools. Most states have this, a minimum amount of land that's required for an elementary school, a middle school, a high school. Most states, including Connecticut and Rhode Island, for a school of over 500 students, would require a minimum of 20 to 25 acres. You do not have that at Glenbrook. You definitely do not have that at William Street. So right now, there's traffic every morning. The lead-in from William Street to the middle school drop-off backs up onto William Street, okay? And because parents are impatient, they're on their way to work, they look for shortcuts. So what do? The corner of Blockland and Terry, even though there's a sign that says this is not a drop-off, they drop off students. Because there's a no left turn from William Street into Woolworth, people come down to Woodside, turn around on our driveways, turn around on all our neighbors' driveways. They're creating a safety issue. We have young kids on the street now. There's 2 or 3 families with young kids on our street. If you bring 650 students to this site, okay, an already difficult traffic situation is going to become a nightmare for these neighborhoods. And so back to the quality of life. You had while this may solve the education problems, and there are many other locations in town that we can put a school, all right? I've been putting together lots that are available that are over 20 acres in town. There's at least 3 or 4 spots that can accommodate, with the appropriate amount of land, a school that's going to house up to 700 students. You simply do not have the land at Williams, and to be honest, you probably don't have it at Glenbrook either. But back to the traffic issue. The center of town here has a high school, a middle school, an elementary school, the only grocery store in town, most of the restaurants, most of the commerce. It's all within a 3/4 square mile. It's about a half mile from my house on the corner of Woodside and Williams to the Big Y. You cannot cram everything into one small space. The traffic is already unbearable, and it's only going to get worse. So I'm going to pass this along to anybody else that would like to speak, but I do not think this is a good idea. I think you were premature in crossing Glenbrook off and some of the other sites off your list. I did watch last night, your last month's meeting, so, we did get the sense that you're down to just two options, and they both involve the Williams Middle School site. And I just think it's not big enough, it's inappropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. And I ask the crowd not to make any noises while the speaker is speaking. Give them the respect they deserve, please.
I'm Teresa DiGiulio. I live at 8 Woodside Drive. I am Bill's wife. And I just, again, have to reiterate his traffic point. So on William Street and Grassy Gutter, there was a woman killed by a car. So there's already one death 2 blocks away from our home. You want to double, triple the traffic. We already have a high school that kids speed down Woodside Drive to get to school because Wilkins has drop-off and pickup hours that you cannot be on that road driving to or from school. So they come down our street. We have called the police and we have asked to come and sit and watch. They do nothing. So, also another point is our driveway. We have to keep caution tape on our driveway because we just had a driveway repaved over a year ago. But people, prior to us doing that, we had a sinkhole because people keep coming and turning around in our driveway because it's impossible to take a left-hand turn, or there's a sign saying no left-hand turn to go into William Street Middle School. So people find a shortcut, like he said, and they come to our home, pull in our driveway with our cars in the driveway, and they turn around in our driveway. Let somebody go in your driveways every single day, how many times a day, how many people a day, turn around with their wheels on the hot pavement, you're gonna get a sinkhole. So we've had to incur that cost, so we had a new driveway put in. People still do it. We had to keep the caution tape up since the day we had our driveway done a year, almost 2 years ago. Parents on a daily basis, how many times a day, pick up, drop off their kids on Terry and Blockland. I've driven to try to go to work. I'm gonna be late for work because people are in the middle of the roads picking up their kids. They won't move. You honk your horn, they give you the finger. They will not move. One day, I was actually going from Woodside, took a left on Blockland. There was actually a police officer in his cruiser, SUV, coming the opposite direction, cars parked on the sides, and I rolled down my window and I said to him, there are signs everywhere, no parking, not a turnaround. What are you gonna do about this? And he smiled and laughed at me and drove off. This is the respect you get, and you wanna double the traffic, triple the traffic. So, we live not too far from the fire station and the police station. We bought knowing we were living on a main corner of a main road. You're not gonna be able to solve a traffic problem with like 700 children and faculty members. Police aren't gonna be able to go up and down the street. It's gonna be blocked. There's not enough room on that property for a huge school and all this parking spaces and driveways. So we also had a teenager drive into our property. He was in a car with another fellow and they drove right up on our property, totaled my parents' car, did a 180, came toward our house. Thank God our light post was there because he hit the gas instead of the brake because he was freaking out. And the light post stopped the SUV. Otherwise, it would have went into our living room and we could have been killed because we were sitting there 10 minutes before that. So add more traffic. That is not the solution. This is not the solution. You need to find another piece of property or renovate both schools. You cannot build a new school and house both schools in one property. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else would like to address the board? Good.
Go ahead.
I'll be very quick.
Just state your name and address, please.
That's Rick Ratner, 28 Woodside.
Thank you.
There is a recurring theme about the traffic. And I'll specifically address Woodside. I think members of this committee need to actually observe the traffic in the morning when cars are dropping off kids at both the high school and the middle school, and in the afternoon, again, when they are being picked up. It is like the Indianapolis 500. These cars go flying down the street, and I can't imagine the impact it's going to have when the traffic doubles. So, again, I think it would be appropriate if members of this committee actually observe the situation for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Richard Engelson, 31 Woodside Drive. You know, if you own a car, if you own a house, you do the maintenance. That's your investment. I've been living in town for decades. If the school department did its proper maintenance, we wouldn't be here tonight. If the school department did the proper maintenance at the high school, we would not have to build a new high school. I remember that we had a nice elementary school on Converse Street. The school department couldn't wait to sell it. They said there'll be not enough students. So what they did, they sold a beautiful building, and they spent money to an addition to Wolf Swamp School and another school. We came out at a loss. I remember back in the 60s, they couldn't wait to build an elementary school on Maple Road. What happened to that? You know, you got to use common sense. I mean, I see my taxes going up all the time. A lot of this could have been avoided. Let's not make any mistakes. The two junior high school, the middle schools, the two of them, if you did the maintenance right from the beginning, you wouldn't have this problem. And I'm against, of course, as the previous speakers, about the traffic. I mean, if you want to leave Woodside Drive in the morning, you need a traffic cop there. If they're going to build a new school, there'll be so many buses and cars there. Would I be able to leave my street? I mean, would the school department have a uniform officer so we can leave and go to work, you know? So I want you to think about everything. As Bill said, there's other locations. It's past. You didn't do the maintenance, now you got a problem. But figure something out for the neighborhood. And we just don't want, the people here who live around, we don't want the addition. You know, just repair the old building. Thank you.
Thank you. We have about 4 minutes left for comments, if somebody else wants to give some comments.
Good evening. My name is Vonda Bonacci. I live at 461 William Street. And my home is on a hill, and my kitchen is on William Street. So consequently, I see everything. And my main concern is Bill, the gal that died, that was a very dear friend of mine. She just retired as a nurse. 3 months retired, and she got nailed right there at the high school. If you want to check out this traffic, every morning I sit in my kitchen and I look at the delivery trucks that deliver at the elementary school. And you should see the traffic just to get the trucks in there. And there's what, 4 or 5 trucks, you know, produce and so on and so forth. And when there's a ball game during the day, yeah, I spend a lot of time in my kitchen. I have animals, I feed them, I get home early. People are lined up, honking their horns, especially when we have ball games and coming in from out of town. Everybody's giving, you know, the middle flag. Everybody's angry. The kids in the neighborhood, when they're coming out of school, they're on their bikes. I don't have a sidewalk, but they they cross Woodside, they run over my neighbor's lawn, over my lawn, they do jumps with their skateboards, they run over Mr. Kalich's lawn, in through the woods, into the backyard. I mean, you know, it's just, and I don't know, I don't know how you guys are gonna plan on doing this, putting like 700 or 800 kids there, plus there'll probably be a ball field. It's gonna be a nightmare, and children will get killed. Parents, I mean, there'll be accidents. There are accidents there now. I mean, you know, people don't wanna stop. You know, here's another thing that no one has mentioned, you know. William Street is a major artery. It's not an arterial. It's a major artery. And constantly, and I've been there a long time, constantly, during the night, during the day, ambulance and fire trucks and the policemen, they're up and down. I mean, we are the busiest town for sirens. Good Lord, I don't know if there's something in our water, but we're busy. So, you know, I mean, I think it's a real safety issue. And of course, I haven't looked at his portfolio for where we could build. But as I ride around, I see other huge properties. I mean, no, we're so suffocated now, you know? We've got the high school, and, you know, and here's another thing I want to bring up. You know, when we agreed to build a high school, they told us, you know, this is going to be it. This is it now. You know, we're going to take it easy for a while. And then it was the dump. And then it was the new senior center. You know, our taxes are through the roof. When I first came here, my taxes were $2,800. Now my taxes are close to $16,000. And I've been here 22 years. I mean, thank God. I mean, you know, I mean, I'm not. But anyway, this isn't about me. But the traffic is going to be, you know, it's going to be, yeah, this isn't good. But thank you for listening. You know, I worry about the children. I really do, you know. And you know, kids don't listen. Parents try to keep the kids quiet, but parents are fighting with each other, and you know, and then just like Dick just said, you know what? If you want to come like during the day when the kids are being dropped off or are being picked up, and all the parents are, you know, they're all lined up just like the high school, the honking horns. Imagine that, triple that by, you know, the number. So I don't know. You know, I know my neighbor, my immediate neighbor. She's leaving because of the traffic. They just moved in. They've been there 4 years, but they can't take it anymore. They want to be in more a community that's more quiet. But, you know, it is a major artery. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. We have used the 15 minutes. I thank everybody for their comments, and the board definitely appreciates the input, and we'll definitely take all of those into consideration as we're moving forward with the project. All right. Next on the agenda is minutes. Tom? Yes. Approval of minutes, May 1st, 2024. Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the May 1st, 2024 minutes as presented.
Motion made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any conversation about that? Seeing none, I will call for a vote. Chris?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Marty?
Yes.
Armin, yes.
Yes.
Dave? Yeah. Thank you. All right. Oh, Josh, you guys are in the, sorry. Julie, Josh? Julie?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Okay.
We can make room for you.
Yeah, we can definitely make room for you. Okay, on June 5th, 2024, the board received correspondence. It has been put into correspondence and duly noted for the record going forward. Moving next, we'll go to new business. Adam, schedule update?
Yep. You want to pull up the presentation? I think we have the schedule on there. There you go. So just a quick schedule update. So the PDP submission was submitted to the MSBA. We had a brief phone call with the MSBA earlier this week, and we received comments back on the PDP submission, I believe it was yesterday. So we'll be reviewing those comments and responding accordingly. But we are in the PSR stage, which is the preferred schematic report submission, and so that is going till the end of August. So August 29th is that submission date there. So we are on schedule at this point. On the next slide, Marty, yep. So we have a community forum for the middle schools, which is going to be a great event, and that's going to be at the Long Meadow Adult Center, and that's going to be next Wednesday, June 18th, from 7 to 8:30. So we hope
Tuesday.
I'm sorry, Tuesday.
No
Apologize. From June 18th, from 7 to 8:30, and that is going to be an event where we're going to be presenting to the community, again, to different options, how we came to those options, looking for feedback and questions and answering questions, a little bit of dialogue back and forth about the project. So that's going to be a great event to have further conversations about where we are today.
Marty, on that link that you did on the meeting for next Tuesday, you also linked to the site, right? Where the PDP is?
To our website where the PDP is, and then also to a survey that we're using to collect feedback for the committee.
Okay, and just so everybody knows, that within all of those documents is everything we took into consideration when we were talking about the sites and talking about what we were estimating out, and including, like, there's scores on all of the categories there within the back of the packet. And I just pointed out because the state may not have looked at it as hard as we did. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that those things are there. The slides with the pros and cons of every single option are there as well. So just so you have a bit for your knowledge. Thanks, Marty. Cool.
Any questions on schedule update?
And the other thing I'll bring up on the schedule update is that we did talk to the state just about timing. You know, were we moving too quickly? Were we moving too slowly? They agreed we're right on track of where we should be for this point. You know, based upon what they're saying, we still have to respond to the PDP questions they have.
Correct.
But
Yep.
outside of that, we were looking pretty good from a time perspective of what that timeline looks for everybody in here and in the community.
Good.
You can always.
For the benefit of folks watching or folks that have joined us, the preferred schematic report submission, could you describe that just briefly for us?
Yeah. You want to go ahead?
Yeah.
Well, the architect's going to come up with the solutions that becomes the preferred one voted by the committee. And with that, that has to go in and be looked at. It has to be sent in by the August, 28th date. And then there's a facilities assessment subcommittee at the MSBA. That committee looks at it and looks for comments or criticisms or critiques it basically, and then talks back to us as far as what their thoughts are, and we listen to that and generate revised plans from that as we move forward. So it's not like just the architect's dream is just now hit the paper and it's been approved by the committee. The MSBA, who's a partner in this whole ongoing involvement, is going to have a very big say in it as well, with their eyes and ears on it. And they're made up typically of many other architects within the state as part of that committee.
Great.
Thank you.
Anybody questions on the schedule? Okay, move on to B, the comments from the MSBA, then the call we had last week.
Great. So, yeah, we did have a productive phone call with them on June 4th. We just wanted to outline some of the larger points. Arn was there, and Marty, and several of the members of the committee. And so for the PDP submission, we had costed out 5 options that looked the most promising. Again, we had kind of gone through that process with the school building committee meeting. The MSBA was like all 10 options costed out, and that's fine. That's work that we've already started. We've been in touch with our cost estimator, PM&C. They understandably wanted to make sure that the district was aware of the auditorium and the fact that if the auditorium is part of the project, that portion of the project would not be reimbursable by the state. It's something that we've brought up before, but they just wanted to make sure. In addition to that, they want to, at the PDP level, they wanted an option that showed, or 2 options, one that showed the proposed approach with an auditorium and one that shows it without an auditorium. And we're still having a little bit of back and forth with them on, how many different options they want to see, the with auditorium or without auditorium. That was something that we thought we would probably get into as we got further along into the details in this preferred schematic report phase that we're in now, but happy to back up and try and at least get an understanding of, how that cost will impact the square footage cost that we developed during the PDP. It gets complicated because we won't be able to do the calculations that kind of take into account how much the MSBA will reimburse for the rest of the project, right? I mean, to get into that level of detail, we do need to wait longer, but we'll at least get some rough numbers to start understanding, the impact of including or not including an auditorium. The MSBA requested a base repair code upgrade option for the Williams Middle School as well.
Christian, can you hold on
which-
1 second?
Yeah.
Do you mind just identifying who you are?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Just a guy. Christian Whitsitt with Jones Whitsitt Architects. Dory Brooks and I are the two principals at Jones Whitsitt Architects, and we've got some other folks on Zoom who will introduce themselves as we go along.
And I should have introduced everybody, or at least who the parties are at the beginning, but these represent our architects. And then Adam and Alan are from Collier's Construction. They are our owner's project manager, and they are the ones that guide us through this entire process. So that's just to make sure everybody else is tunnel on that.
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry.
No, great point. Who is this guy? So the MSBA also requested that we include a base repair code upgrade for the Williams Middle School. So we went through that. The costs were surprisingly high for Glenbrook. Again, that's to bring it all up to code, make sure it is completely accessible, which is more difficult these days because that also means bringing it up to the energy code, which basically means you need to redo the insulation everywhere throughout the entire building. So Williams was not part of the original statement of interest, so that was a bit of a surprise to us, but we're happy to develop that for the MSBA. So then, as Adam mentioned, there was
Just a
Josh.
question on that one.
Yeah, of course.
Are they asking that for comparison's sake, or would they, since it wasn't the SOI, would they fund that, or fund both schools theoretically?
Josh, it was unclear from the meeting, from my perspective in the meeting. It was, they insisted that it be done. And
Seems like a
then
weird thing to bring up at this point.
it was a
Right.
weird thing to bring up, especially since, and Dory and crew definitely pushed back and said that the statement of interest was from Glenbrook, that what's what got us into the system. That's why we did not put numbers behind that. But I think in there, at least something I'm hoping is that, yes, we know that just bringing Glenbrook up to code, no improvements whatsoever, just bringing the building into safety and is like over $80 million. So if you're looking at the comparison of why wrapping two schools into one, that times two, just to bring it up to standards and codes is what it was. So yeah, Josh, I think that's what it was, is them being able to look side by side and saying, it's what is in the best interest of the community, as we've been doing already from a cost perspective.
I think in the long run, it will help us. It'll
Yes.
give us some valuable additional data to talk to to share with the community. That's it.
And the good thing is, we actually did all the assessment of both schools
Right.
equally. There was no requirement for that cost exercise to happen, so it's not that difficult for us to put that together.
The other thing I would say on the auditorium, just so everybody knows where we are to date, is that working with the architects and with Colliers, we understood that the auditorium is not paid for. That would be something we would be looking to value engineer out if that had to happen because of the cost or because it wasn't something that would be supported by the community. The MSBA is actually asking us to do it the opposite way. They want to see what it costs with and without upfront, so that we are accommodating.
So we did get many more comments yesterday via email. I would say most of them are fairly typical. The above ones were a little bit more of a surprise to us. Lots of comments on the educational program, which is understandable. That's what they look at in great detail. A lot of it is comments that say, please address this by the time you submit for the preferred schematic report, so that's fine, but then some of them do require a response within 14 days. So we've already started outlining that. We'll share that with the district, and there's a few comments from our design team and a few for the owner's project manager, and we'll get that response to them shortly.
Next slide.
So we wanted to report back on, we have had some existing conditions reports done, so we had already.
Hold on one second.
Yep.
You're pretty quick there on the trigger.
Oh, so-
I just want to see if there was any comments on
Oh,
that
there you go.
agenda
Okay.
item before we move forward.
There you go.
Yeah. All right, sorry, Christian. Go
That's
ahead.
okay.
Good?
Yep.
Yeah, so we have been having folks out there doing more existing conditions reports, which have been very helpful. So we had Ty and Bond do a traffic report of both the William Street site and the Glenbrook site. These are, just very broad brush over summaries. In their opinion, a consolidated middle school at either site is possible and feasible. They definitely recognize that Glenbrook would have a larger impact on the surrounding residential neighborhood. They also, as has been noted this evening, that queuing at Williams will be critical to keep cars off of Williams Street. They recommended to maintain the access from Woolworth Street, which I thought was an interesting kind of conclusion from the report. That's something that you'll see tonight we're exploring in some of our early site plans, but I think that there are pros and cons to both. And so that's something that we'll want to, talk to with the committee and the community as a whole. Ty and Bond also did an environmental site assessment. This is sometimes called a Phase 1 report, and this is looking at environmental conditions around the site, looking at kind of the history of uses of the site, doing surveys from the district and seeing if there have been any spills that need to be cleaned up, et cetera. So through all of their research, they found no controlled recognized environmental conditions, CRECs, and no historical recognized environmental conditions, HRECs. This is good news. That means, if they had found those, then we would have had to do a Phase 2 report where they get into much more detail, more expensive, and then potentially some, hazardous mitigation required as part of the construction. But the only thing they flagged is that both sites have a 15,000 gallon oil tank that will have to be removed during future development. They also flagged a pad-mounted transformer at the Williams site.
Any questions for Christian on traffic or environmental site assessment? Yeah, Marty.
On the queuing, and really it's sort of queuing on the Williams campus is really probably what we're talking about.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been thinking about is the amount of roadway on the existing campus versus the amount of roadway we could conceivably put on a new campus. And the other thing is, I think one of the things that, though there is a decent amount of roadway on campus currently, it doesn't really serve as a load-unload road for students, right? It really is just a car lane. And so the key to getting a lot of students into a school or out of a school is really to have a broad stretch of area to load or unload students. So I think, as we look at the site plans, it'll be interesting to see how much roadway we can incorporate on campus to keep the traffic off of Williams, because I think that's a real legitimate thing that we need to address.
Yeah.
On similar vein, how much busing analysis has been done so far included with this?
So this is really just looking at kind of existing conditions and just thinking about the quantity of cars and buses for a consolidated middle school. Once we have a proposed site, then we'll do a more in-depth traffic study on that particular site. Working with our landscape architect, we have gotten some data from the district on number of buses expected, size of buses, number of cars expected. And so we're already starting to think about that, but yeah, there'll be further traffic studies that will go into much more detail.
Yeah, Josh, just rough, napkin math, it was definitely because of where the Glenbrook was located for that site, was more buses than to get to Williams. The other thing was to, as we discussed in the past meetings, to encourage children to both bike and walk to school. We wanted to make it equally distant as much as possible to get there, and, you know, encourage people to ride their bikes and walk. Any other questions on these?
Next,
Okay.
Do we have the traffic report, or it'll just be in the PSR?
It will both be in the PSR, and we can also forward it along to the committee, for sure.
And as Christian said, the traffic report happens at sort of later stages as well. We are constantly kind of expanding it based on how the design's going and what more needs to be studied. So there would be more work in the future as well.
That makes sense, but I think this is the one that we get that is most helpful for comparing the
Yeah.
two sites.
So two more, Marty, on the next slide that we've done, or just one more, is the hazardous materials report. So we also went in, again, this is another one where we will do more testing, especially more destructive testing, once, if and or when schematic design is approved, both locally and at the state, then we can really put in much more effort on this. But helpful to get an initial understanding of approximate costs, and this is what will be carried in the schematic design cost estimate, impacting the budget for the rest of the project. So they tested for asbestos, airborne mold, and radon. There are no official guidelines for mold, but both the mold and the radon tests were very low and below radon for the EPA guidelines and mold for the recommended guidelines. Just based off of the asbestos testing done so far, they were able to come up with an estimated hazmat removal cost of $2.5 million for Glenbrook and $2.15 for Williams. So those will be incorporated into the cost estimates going forward. In terms of more existing conditions testing and explorations, we just got a quote for geotechnical exploration, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later tonight. We want to do a hydrant flow test to understand the water pressure at the street, and if we introduce a sprinkler building, will we need a fire pump to feed that sprinkler system or not? Site survey, again, we'll try and do a very limited site survey now, and then if schematic design is approved and it's passed locally, then we'll be able to get more detailed information, but we want to make sure that our schematic design process is as accurate as possible. And a ground source well test. I'm getting my ground source well test and geotechnical confused. So ground source we'll talk a little bit later tonight. Geotechnical, that's really where they're looking in at the quality of the soils and implications for the structural engineer, and a little bit for stormwater management. And we have those borings scheduled to happen after school gets out.
Any questions on anything on this slide from the committee? Okay. Who's got the initial site plan and floor plan? You? Dory? Dory.
So before we get into looking at some plan ideas, we wanted to bring you back to remember some of the things we talked about from the visioning exercise. So we don't want to forget all those great inputs that we've gathered from students and teachers and the community. We culled a lot of that down as we started to approach the plan making into some ideas that we wanted to explore in the educational plan. So at this stage, the floor plan is very, very rough. But it's trying to make sure that we can create these opportunities, these adjacencies that we've discussed. So the general thinking, and these are very general at this point, is the idea is of 6 academic teams. So that's 2 teams per grade. Each grade has a mix of rooms in addition to your kind of core academic classrooms. So there's more than just the classrooms. You also have some special education support spaces, teacher planning spaces, small group spaces. So that's in a way what's changed from that kind of traditional cells and bells school is you're actually sort of bringing more to the table. The district, in our visioning, expressed a strong desire for a sixth grade wing that was intact rather than mixing amongst other grades, so that there's a good transition for sixth graders into middle school. There's a strong STEAM program here that incorporates both STEM classrooms and art classrooms, so a desire to keep some adjacency to those programs, and to keep it on the first floor of the building so that it can have access to outdoor area, because STEM is the program that uses the outdoors most heavily academically. Science, the sixth grade science classrooms would ideally be within the sixth grade clusters, but the seventh and eighth grade would be combined together, so that the adjacency of the resources for science would be together, those labs. And that actually fits neatly over the STEM wing, so we've kind of tried to keep them together as a group. And we're looking at the science for seventh and eighth being on the second floor. Phys ed is more than just the gymnasium. It includes the changing rooms, the adaptive PE space, additional offices, and a kind of a late change to the space summary was the incorporation of a unique classroom that would be able to be divided a little bit, a larger classroom as a part of the health instruction program that would not necessarily be in the academic wing, that might actually be in a more general first floor level, ideally close to the PE wing to support health education, but also useful for other types of programming. It could be a professional development space, could work as a community room in some ways. A media center, the media center in this district has strong connections to the STEM program and STEAM program, and the media center is ideally in this district viewed as a space that would support celebrating student work and creativity, so we want to have space for books but also for display, as well as 2 subrooms that would support the kind of project learning and digital learning that happens in the school. Music programs are very robust in the district. Obviously, those need to be near to the auditorium. The loading dock adjacency is very critical to think about as we look at the plan, you'll see. And then school counseling, the conversation really led us to think that it can happen on the second level. It doesn't have to be on the first level, which is good because we have a lot of first level program. And it has a need to be near to what's being called the Zenden, the SEL classroom or space. The link rooms wanted to be on the first floor, and then admin needs to obviously oversee the main entry. So those are some of the critical adjacencies that we're trying to respond to in the programming. Next slide. So this is just a diagram that represents some of those thinking ideas that came out of the visioning. Nothing to look at yet. It really just is like, okay, there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen on the first floor. We try and think without thinking about site at that stage. Some questions that were left open and that want to be explored in the design process is, again, that question about the auditorium, or whether instead of an auditorium, a cafetorium would work, a gymatorium would work. It was interesting to remember that the students actually liked the idea of a gymatorium more than a cafetorium. A central teacher planning room versus grade level teacher planning. We heard interest in the grade level, but you know, one of the principals talked about how strongly this Williams values its central teacher workroom. So we want to keep looking at that. Internal circulation between guidance and administration is something that we're looking at because of the fact that they're on different floors. Perhaps there could be an internal connection between the two. I've seen that done in schools and thought it was very helpful. Publicly accessible assembly spaces. So we have those major community spaces, the auditorium, the gymnasium, sometimes the cafeteria. They are the biggest numbers, the biggest loads, and they're often available to the community after hours. So do we want to spread those through the school, or do we want to try and cluster them, and how do we want to bring access to them in a way that, you know, aids circulation on the site and addresses safety issues? So those are some of the big questions that we explore on the floor plans. I'm going to turn it over briefly to Brian, who's going to speak about the site as we go to the next slide, because we want to talk about the Williams site and some of the analysis that the landscape team has that also shapes the thinking.
Hello, everyone. Just checking you can hear me from here.
Yep.
Yep, okay. Bear with us. We who are remote cannot see what the screen you're sharing.
Okay.
So I'll be flying blindly a little here, but bear with me. So just touching on the existing conditions, I think the key takeaway.
Hey, Brian, can you hold one?
Brian.
Brian, hold up.
Traffic and parking
Brian.
and so on, has to do with.
Brian.
the current circulation as a
Brian, stop.
Brian.
The backup seems to be from William Street to the parking area.
Oh, yep, Brian, hold on one moment. We're going to share screen with you so that you can see what we're seeing as well.
Okay, perfect.
And if you're able to, if you wouldn't mind starting from the top for us.
Sure. Brian Jarrett, again with Halverson Time Bond. I just wanted to touch on the key points that are relevant to our conversation this evening that have come up a lot, having to do with traffic and parking, and really defined how we focused our thinking in terms of circulation on the new designs. So, as you see and are aware, currently primarily circulation is from Williams and Woolworth into the very small parking area of about 75 cars with parent drop-off directly in front of the school. And as others have noted, that does back up from a traffic perspective all the way down Woolworth Street and on to Williams Street. Currently, the traffic study shows in the mornings access from Williams Street at about 70% and from Woolworth at about 30%. And then when folks leave, it's roughly 50-50%, leaning more towards Williams in terms of when people leave. Those are just interesting things to keep in mind as we discuss whether to close Woolworth Street or not in later conversations. Aside from it being a slightly awkward parking configuration to begin with, that's something else we wanted to look at and resolve. Loading is up near Woolworth currently in the back of the school. And it's a little bit awkward in terms of folks leaving the cafeteria for recess or gathering outdoors. It's sort of right by the dumpsters and so on. There is a fair amount of green space around the building for recess and gathering. I know recess is a short period of time, but there is ample space around the building currently for things like that to happen, or outdoor classroom uses and so on. And play fields obviously are to the south.
Any questions before we get into some schemes here?
If I could maybe just reinforce what I was talking about earlier, that this roadway here to the, I guess, west side of the sports field, it really doesn't serve much of a purpose in terms of loading and unloading kids. Is that fair to say, Principal Flory? Is it really?
No, no one gets, and if it rains, they wait until they get to the front door.
Yeah,
so they're not letting them off
They're
there.
generally unloading in front of the school, so if you have, maybe it's a question for Brian, if there's opportunities to create roadways on a revised site that allow for a greater number of students to load and unload, is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, this is also combining parking, loading, bus, deliveries, all in one very, very small area, including a through road between Woolworth and Williams, all mixed together with no separation. So that's definitely something that we worked to find another option in our upcoming schemes.
One of the benefits here is the length of the roadway does help pull vehicles off of Williams, whether they're leaving their cars or dropping off, they're at least off of the main circulation roadways. So that's something we've considered as well, is how can we mimic this, if not improve it? And we've tried to, you'll see in the parking configurations, increase that queuing opportunity on site. And there is opportunity to unload as well, that's built into that, but that's a question of how you would like folks to circulate and what doors you'd like folks to enter. But that was a primary focus of the schemes we've been reviewing.
So one thing before we leave this slide is that we're exploring both ad reno and new construction. Tonight, we're just going to be looking at the new construction options. But keep in mind that the ad reno option pins the new project to this location. So that is one of the challenges is in both situations, how do we improve the flow of cars and people on the site and make it safer than it currently feels? So moving to the next slide. So in this scheme, you'll see that we've sketched and looked into this a lot of different ways, and some things happen the same in all three, because the more we work on it, the more this feels like there's a reason why that wants to be the case. And some things in each scheme we're trying to show some differences in order to get your reaction to them. Nothing here is at all set in stone. These are just really trying to take the program goals and see how the site can best support them. So in this scheme, you see on the left that what we're exploring is a sixth grade wing on the ground level, as well as half of the 7th, 8th. So one of the 7th, perhaps, communities on the first level. And then you're clustering together the public spaces of the auditorium, the gymnasium, and the cafeteria to the north, so that they would have access directly towards the fields and directly closest to the largest parking area. And then the center of the school would have the media center, the STEM wing, and adjacency to outdoor spaces near there. The administrative wing would be at the front of the school, and that would be the main entrance. On the site plan, you see that we're trying to bring cars and buses and then separate them onto the site. So buses would loop in front of the school and then back out, so that they're providing their queuing in a shorter queue. And the cars, which are the largest, length of grouping to worry about, would be circulated onto the site through a much larger queue than they currently are, and loop around and come back towards the school, and would drop off next to the school as they approach William Street. So that's the thinking behind that. Their parking is divided into in this scheme, 4 separate areas: one in front of the school, 2 in the middle of that loop, but separated from the loop, unlike the way it's currently laid out, where it's not separated at all, and then a smaller cluster to the north. What's nice about this scheme, and what we've tried to do in the schemes, is create a separate connection to the loading dock on the sort of quiet side, which is currently the Woolworth side access. But the Woolworth Street would be cut off on that side. There would be a passage through the entire site still, which is obviously something to talk about. Bringing the cafeteria to that north corner allows the cafeteria and gymnasium to directly spill out towards the outdoor space and towards the field without any roads going across it. So that's the general layout of this idea.
Sorry.
I think it'd be best to go through each of them, all 3 of them, and then we can kind of go back and forth a little bit through them and get your comments on them.
Dory, can I ask you a quick
Dory,
question?
can I add one comment?
Yes, sure, Brian. You and
Just
Adam.
like to clarify the circulation for folks. The bus drop-off goes to the front of the school, and parent drop-off will enter the site from William Street, go all the way to the back of the site, so it's almost the same distance to what exists today to the existing drop-off. But the intent is for them to go around that loop, circle back towards the front of the school, and you'll see there's a turnoff that we're showing in each of these schemes in that location, sort of east of the school itself. So we've got a long lane and queuing area to get the cars off of William Street and alleviate the traffic concerns.
Can people see that parent drop off on kind of to the right side of the building mass? Great.
Can I ask a question about that? Is that a bigger, to Marty's point, is that a bigger parent drop-off area than what we have, or it's the same size, just more living or?
Both bigger and then also totally separate from the bus drop off, which would be just to the south of the school.
Okay.
Yeah.
The idea here also is that visitor parking would be on the south side of the school. You don't have as much need for parking spaces at the visitor area. So that also then becomes a kind of a separate pull of cars into that location.
It's interesting too, we kept thinking about, so what do we need the parking for? Is the parking for visitors that are coming during the school day? Is the parking mostly, which I think is true, mostly for the staff, and then also mostly for after-hours use of that gym and cafeteria and maybe auditorium? And so typically we think about all the parking being at the front of the school, but if those community spaces are in the back of the school, then maybe we want to disperse the parking. So you'll see that kind of reflected in these different options.
Brian, can you verify how many parking spaces you're showing in each of the plans? I don't know if it ended up being the same in all of them?
I think it's on there. It's on the key up there.
It's on the top
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah,
The
200 on
screen
this
is
one.
somehow reading small for us, like
Right.
not in presentation mode or something. But there is, should be in the
Right.
data at the top of the
There it
screen.
is, sorry, I see it. So it's 200 total new. So, and currently Williams has 78 spaces in the existing, so more than twice as many as currently
And so
exist.
kind of the question I was going to ask, similar to that is, have you guys calculated how many cars actually queue on the existing site now versus these different options? Is that something you maybe haven't done yet or you will do, just
They have
roughly?
done their observation. Brian has probably a little bit better sense of that. And it's always tricky because you're also trying to project what is your count going to be when you consolidate, and you don't know for sure which parents will be driving to the school, which won't. So it's,
Yeah, I was just
we're
more
trying to use
seeing how
a
many
rough
cars could
estimate.
actually fit in the queue versus.
Yeah.
How many buses?
The assumption at this point was to calculate for 4 buses.
Right.
So I don't know if you have an answer to exactly how many cars currently queue on that full length of the site, Brian, or if that's something we have to get from the traffic.
No, we can try and calculate how many cars it would actually accommodate, but we never did that calculation.
Okay. Next slide. In this option, we call this a vertical spine. We've shifted things in order to allow the wings. One thing I should have mentioned is academically, we're always trying to get north-south light on the academic wings to get the best daylighting possible for classrooms. So you see, we're always trying to arrange the classroom blocks a certain way. We're less critically concerned about that with spaces like the gymnasium. In this one, we have the gymnasium and the cafeteria and aligned on the left-hand side, and we're exploring the idea of a cafetorium. So you see the overall square footage is smaller without the auditorium, and you would put that stage within the cafeteria and make use of the space of the cafeteria to support the audience, but you would obviously have a diminished kind of performance as an auditorium space. This again puts the gymnasium up in the corner where it can reach the field most easily, puts the administration down at the bottom as a secure entry point, and again tries to keep STEM and Media Center having access to some nice outdoor space. The second floor becomes a little bit more convoluted because we've separated the academic wings into a north and south position. So you have a north wing, a south wing, and you have kind of a bridge to them, which I'm not yet loving. And the major spaces on the left would be kind of different heights based on their rooftop needs. The site plan is showing we have 2 large bays of parking at the front, so in this case, we're pushing the school deeper into the site. Kind of, it goes, the play area, the field, the school, and then parking, so it's a little bit more of a division that way. There's still 2 bays of parking at the back, and we're trying to get as much queuing space for cars as possible, so we try again to do this loop, and we really explored a lot of different ideas, but for the concerns people have raised here tonight, we're trying to do everything we can to pull as many cars onto the site to keep them off of Williams for this circulation and drop-off. But this puts a larger loop at the front for that bus drop-off, and in some ways it's sort of splitting the difference between the two, and again puts the service on the left-hand side. So this is a little bit more parking space provided because of the access and use of the front area for more parking. And otherwise, you see that there's still, part of why we show, well, we're still being active, is that we know that would provide, it's one of those things Christian was saying, it's both good and bad. The bad is, it would be great to cut off traffic through there entirely. If you cut traffic off there entirely, then all the traffic is coming from one point onto the site. And so having that access does alleviate some of the pressure on the entry point at Williams.
Before we move on, I have comment. I just got a comment. Chris sent me an email, so I just wanted to read that, just to make sure his thoughts were out here. His suggestion would be to stick with the, I'm going to get this wrong, orthogonal geometry, 90-degree corners, limit the number of corners, every inside or outside, only adds cost complexity. That would, Option B, he said from JWA, is along this line of thinking. I don't think you lose anything from a design perspective in comparison to the other options. So Chris is an OPM for public housing projects, so valuable member of the board. He could not be here tonight, but I want to make sure his thoughts were shared, especially if it belongs to option B.
So I didn't follow that at all.
He
What
likes,
he's saying-
he said
He has
likes
fewer
B,
corners.
because he says it 90-degree corners, I'll read it directly. Every inside or outside corner not only adds cost and complexity to the construction with a need for flashing and other details to make the materials come together and change planes, but also creates spaces along the inside corners that are windowless and limits how they can functionally be used to hang things like closets and mechanical spaces. So he says 90-degree angles is what he wants, and option B looks the most accommodating to that.
Yeah.
And B has less interior corridors as well. So that,
Can I ask a question about this one?
Mhm.
The parking that's in the front there, is that meant to be during school hours staff parking or any parking?
It would probably have to be both staff and visitors. Yeah, you might be deciding whether some staff are going to one location, some are doing the other, because it's more than would accommodate simply visitors.
I'm asking for the perspective of what would be the preventative measure for families not pulling into that space and beginning to unload kids there as well
Yeah,
with the
that's-
bus traffic through. So I'm just curious what that could look like.
Yeah, I would agree that that might be.
Obviously, school has begun and people are coming in for
Right.
meetings. Great to have visitor spots.
Yeah, and when
But
we
during
have
drop-off and
situations.
pickup, not as great.
Yeah, when we have situations like that where you have that overlap where the parent parking, or staff parking is divided, that does become part of the challenge of the design, is how you communicate and manage it. So I would agree, that's probably one of the weaker aspects of this one compared to the last one, where you're more clearly separating that.
And would the access to those lots be sort of following the bus loop? Same kind of idea?
Yes, you'd be turning in and then going into the parking, so you're
Okay.
not necessarily going over the same
Yeah.
loop.
Okay.
But yeah, there's some crossing, and then you get into time of day, like when are staff arriving and when are the buses arriving, so it all becomes a,
Roughly all at the same time.
yeah, but if it's all at the same time, it becomes challenging, yeah. Yeah. Yes.
The spine on level 2,
Mhm.
second floor on the right-hand side, those would be science rooms connecting?
Yeah.
And the lower block of classrooms would be the sixth grade wing? Or-
In this one, the lower block, and on the second floor level, so on the first floor level, the north block, the longer block is the sixth grade wing.
Gotcha.
And then the front is, I've been imagining that the 7th and 8th, we might not necessarily say distinctly a 7th. So that means that front, lower, first floor and second floor block are 7th, 8th, and the back block on the second floor is also 7th, 8th. And it becomes a question of how we want to program that. Do we want them to be grade level communities or different types of teams? Yeah, so to the comment about, yeah, I think what we find is the site is very tall. So it's kind of stretching, it's becoming a vertical directed site. And your north-south is running this way. So we keep having that tension. This one is more compact, I would agree, then partly because there's no auditorium, so it's a little bit less program to worry about. But there are challenges, because this is an educational program, not a housing program. We have desire to get daylighting in certain spaces. So there's a way in which Chris is right. Yes, corners can be challenging, and too many ins and outs become costly. There's also a challenge in this example of getting good daylight into certain spaces. So it's all, and this is very early. So every scheme is going to evolve. Brian, sorry, more questions? Yeah.
Just real quick, I'm pretty sure that I saw on option A, there were clearly defined 2 stairwells, and I only see 1 on this one. Is the idea to have multiple on option B as well?
Yeah, there would not automatically by code, by egress. In this one, you're seeing explored a stairwell's interior on that large bar. So it's a little black box there, and it's a little early to worry too much about that. Depending on the length of the hallway, you might want that stairwell on the outside of the building, essentially. And in some cases, you could have it internally, depending on how far you are from, how long that stretches. So we wouldn't have, at this point, explored that deeply. We'll get into it. But each academic wing will certainly have an extra egress stairwell. And then you would have a main stairwell in the center part of the building. So at least 3 stairwells in the school this size, possibly 4. And an elevator.
One elevator?
Could be 2. That's an option. It's a common discussion point.
You worried about something?
Yeah.
Brian, did you have any additional comments on this?
I'll just have folks pay attention to what's happening just outside the building too. You touched on it some. We've noted cafe terraces and outdoor gathering opportunities. There's a lot of potential in all of these options, the way the roads are configured, to have a strong connection to the green spaces on the north and western side of the building here. So keep an eye on those and those relationships to the gym and cafes, because there could be some very nice experiences there and connections to the green space.
Okay, next slide. This option actually, again, places those classroom and academic wings to the south, and it tries to make a clear demarcation between the academic and the larger spaces of media center, auditorium, gymnasium, cafeteria. Again, this would allow community access to that sort of after-hours entry point at the back. More closely tied to the parking, and it puts a larger cluster of parking. This is the largest parking scheme of 240 spots, but again, reduces to the front area being just 1 bay of parking. So similar layout as the first scheme on the site circulation. We still, again, have that loading loop that loops around. So we're trying to, it's a delicate balance, trying to create nice outdoor space around the classroom wings, be sure they get good lighting, but also be sure that we're providing that service road to loading in order to keep the trucks that are going to have to the end of the site away from front door and away from play areas and things like that. So putting it in as safe a position as possible. So you see some improvements, I think, overall on that scheme for some of the outdoor space and circulation. And again, we still found that it was most useful to keep the playing field organized in such a way that you're not driving around it, and you're not driving around the school as a whole. There is a requirement that the school be able to be serviced by fire trucks, and this provides that. We will also be meeting with the fire department this week to talk about their needs and preferences in these different types of schemes, so that we understand as a baseline their concerns. I think what's interesting about this from a design perspective is the way that this kind of, it's sort of street-like approach on the interior kind of allows some putting on display some of the academics. So the STEM wing is in a really central position near the media center, and yet with daylighting kind of coming in around it. And you have that admin control of the front door, but you have this kind of movement, and you have the ability to keep the academic a little bit quieter and away from the large public spaces. So we're super interested in the different perspectives on this. I think this doesn't quite capture the kitchen cafeteria arrangement. Actually was to be rearranged a little bit. The cafeteria should be a little bit more to the outside, because it would have the outside space on that block. So I apologize, that was a mistake in the drafting there. But that blue block represents that dining and kitchen area, and it would probably really shift a little bit around there. Any questions on this concept?
Marty? I like the adjacencies in this one more than the other options.
Yeah.
The question I have is the sort of the aesthetics from William Street. You're sort of looking at the side of the building. You'd really have to be attentive to how that looks, because typically the side of a two-story building.
Yeah, it's actually, so it's a little early for others to gather, but in our brains, so we've angled that a little bit to balance with Williams. So it's responding to Williams Street. It is a two-story block on the left that looks like a school, and then the right hand, the admin would be potentially one story.
I see.
So we wanted to bring that down and then have sort of a column essentially of two-story, storefront essentially that gives you sort of a bit of a beacon element that separates the two. So I think that could be attractive. With all the schemes, you have this kind of, the narrowest part of the building is looking towards the street. Looking at it from the side, the parent drop-off is also very interesting, in that it's a series of stepping elements, so it's not just one monolithic scale building from that side, because you have the auditorium at one end, you have the admin at the other. So, and you have some moments where you have some actually two-story light between things. So I think that could be interesting as well. Each of them has opportunities but challenges with that kind of massing. And as we move forward, we'll obviously explore the massing with you.
I like that it separates the community spaces from the classroom spaces.
Great. Yes, Nicole?
Question and then comments. On this one, it looks like it has the widest expansion for student drop-off from parents. Is that correct? That sort of curve that runs the whole length of the building at the top there, that would all be where parent drop-offs, so sort of the biggest range of where cars could pull up
The
and begin to
queuing,
unload students.
the longest queuing.
The
Yes, it
longest,
certainly
okay.
does. Yeah.
So I'm mostly thinking about exterior stuff at this point. I'm particularly thinking about student safety when it comes
Right.
to parking lots, because we're talking about middle schoolers here. So I'm thinking, for example, here in the mornings, we have a lot of families that are dropping off, and they don't all pull onto campus. They often begin unloading kids on the sidewalks leading up to. Now, that's a little bit more doable for two reasons. One, they're high school students, but two, the way the school building is set, there is space to kind of make that happen. The sidewalk is right there, the building sidewalk curves right along the inside and heads to there, and it's not where buses are crossing. The buses have a different lane that they're going through. For the other two that I've seen, my larger concerns are that the way that parents are pulling into this space, if they begin to let students out after they turn right into this Williams area, the students are on the opposite side of the building, which means they're now crossing over 2 lanes of traffic to hop out of their parents' car and get into the building quickly, which is concerning to me. I'm also worried about at pickup time, if parents are parking in that lot in the front to pick their children up, then children are going to be crossing bus lanes before or in front of and behind buses to get to that parking lot area, both of which make me concerned. I do like that there's a larger drop-off radius with this one, and I think that's what I like the most about this one, because it will move things along a little bit faster, potentially alleviating some of the incentive for folks to drop off at random places. But I'm just trying to get in front of that. I still also have concerns with Woolworth. I know we've talked about this before, but I also have concerns with Woolworth being an entry
continued.
point as well for all the same reasons.
Yeah.
Particularly the concerns about kids traversing through that region to get to the building, and going across those parking lots. I'm just trying to think where folks might try to move a little
Right.
bit more quickly, because it's
Yeah.
8:30 in the morning and folks are trying to get to work and kids are running a little late and somebody forgot their backpack and the 27 other things that happen to all of us on a regular morning. And just make sure that we're considering those
Right. So
those things as well, not just where
Yeah.
we want cars to go, but
Right.
where they might go anyway.
To recap, your point is that if you can get out on Woolworth, you have an incentive to pull in, and when your child's been driving you crazy all morning, let them drop off right away and then keep going out, rather than do the queue that you're
That would be my
expected to do. I
concern,
see.
particularly because it's on the wrong side
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
building, which just, I'm worried about the crossing 2 lanes
And
of
if the
cars.
Woolworth connection were severed, and, I assume students would still bike through there and arrive
Yes.
by bike or walking through Woolworth, there'd be no prohibiting that.
Yeah.
But parents would.
And I know that
would
we have
not.
trickiness surrounding that because we can't close it off for emergency access either, and so that's something that we have to be cognizant of. I just want us, when we're looking at, and we don't have to solve this tonight, we have time for these things, but as we look at our traffic studies and as we consider how the building is put together, I want to make sure we're also considering how people are going to move through
Yeah.
the area, because it is a lot of folks in a very condensed amount of time. And
Yeah.
we're not all going to end up showing up very early to give ourselves lots of time for lines. And so what that will look like on a daily basis, and how we make sure that once kids are on campus, they are able to move safely from cars and to cars without putting them in harm's way.
Josh?
I noticed in A and B, the traffic pattern ran along the old existing site building. Is there a reason for that? Is there a reason why? And what is the intention between, on A and B, between the field, the lined field, and the traffic?
Which part?
I think he's
If
talking
you
about, like,
back.
go back.
You'll see
So-
that it runs along the
Right.
old building. I just
On
didn't
the
know if
north
there's a reason.
side,
Oh, yeah,
to
the north
connect to
side.
Woolworth.
No,
No,
the
up down.
circulating. the queue.
Oh, I see,
I think
I
that's
see.
largely, we were trying to, it's a bit hard to read because you can see the existing building underneath, so it's reading as white. But the more we can accommodate the green space, the better. So in this one, we're actually, it's a benefit to some degree that the field is separated from that parking by a greater span of space.
Yeah, I
So
was-
the idea was you have a play area on the field, but you also have some area around it. In the last one, we're just tucking closer to that. So they would both be done at the same time after demolition of the existing school. So there's no, that could be adjusted either direction.
I think it was just, it happened to work out that way with the depth of the parking.
Yeah.
But it is just the prioritizing amount of parking versus amount of field space.
Yeah.
Julie, you have something?
Well, I was just curious about whether any of them have an advantage or disadvantage for like encouraging biking and walking that you see. I know, Nicole, I think you raised a bunch of things that are relevant to that, but do you see any of them as better or worse?
Where would we encourage folks, for example, for bikers? Where would we want to put bike racks for a scenario like this? Would we
Right.
have them on both ends of the building? Are we expecting students to be able, I know we are expecting students to be able to go in on both ends of the building, but does that mean our walkers are walking between the buses to get from the sidewalk up to the front door?
Well, so you can see this is still very early in the detailing of it, so there's a lot more pedestrian circulation that can control, actually that access point, and that, part of it is, what we're interested in is the district thinking about what does this mean from a control standpoint. So for instance, in some of these scenarios where the media center is on the right-hand side of the plan and the parent drop-off is there, is the district interested in an access directly into the school there instead of coming through that front door? Because this is the time of day when all the students are arriving and you want to get them to the cafeteria. It depends on sort of how all of that morning activity operates. Or does the district want to be sure that everybody enters one doorway? So that's been a lot of our discussion, because in this plan, if you had a sort of in this 15-minute block, all three doorways are accessible, then we'd want to be able to anticipate students arriving at all those locations and provide accommodations for bike storage in various places. Whereas if the district would rather not have it be that dispersed, which some districts are very, very firm on this approach, then, you want to be sure that you accommodate that by creating the outdoor space around that entry point. So that's more to be explored once we understand your reaction to it.
Marty?
Listen, I was just saying, when we talk about control and understanding where kids are going and everything, that's on me. That's my job. Once they're in my building, they are my safety issue. No, I don't want them coming in a bunch of doors all at once to get them off the street, because now they're a safety issue. They're not bothering the cars, but now I have to worry about having staffing in the building. So my thing is, there's a ton of different ways. We won't know until we actually have the plan, so we can, come up with all these different options, but my thing is, if there's a bus lane at the end of the day, by the way, school opens up at 7:45. Our car line in the morning is not our car line in the afternoon. They are two different experiences. Our students are coming in a half hour before school starts, very slowly. So we are not having this like all at once, even on a rainy day. The other thing is, we have at least a third of our students are already biking, already. On a beautiful day, the car line's down and our bike racks are full. And our kids have no problem
That's great.
parking a bike and walking on the sidewalk to get in the right way. My other thing is, if we do have 4 buses and there's one exit for them, it is our job and my job to set up my teachers to know exactly which kids, and it takes no time at all for us to know which kids go on the bus. They're the only ones exiting that door, because if you're exiting that door, you're getting on a bus, you're not getting in a car, and everybody else goes another way. Traffic cones, my custodians, all of that is part of the process that myself and my admin team would work every single day, and I would make sure that there was conversations and consequences for students who could not follow the safety rules. But again, that's on me when the building finally gets set and organized. So that, I promise you, would be my concern as well. I do understand the safety of driving around and making sure kids aren't getting out of the cars, but we can only promote so much, and unfortunately, we know there are parents who do whatever they want on other streets outside of my property, so that's one thing that we can hope and support them as best we can. But again, I think there's a lot of ifs, and our goal, I'm just saying, as the principal, would be to make sure they are safe, especially at the exit when it is everybody at 250 coming out.
Julie?
Well, it sounds like you're saying one entrance is, which I think we all defer to you on that sounds fine. But I think there is just a relationship between the people using multiple points in the neighborhood and how fast that line moves. As a parent who drops at Williams, I have anxiety about getting in that line because it's really long and you can't get out of it once you're in and you're stuck forever,
And there's a
right?
crossing that happens between two entrances.
Yeah. So I think, whatever we can do to make that flow move fairly smoothly, but I don't know if are we working within limits there? How many cars can drop off at one time, reasonably at a site without it being?
I think that's what we just asked earlier.
It's a kind of so based on what we hear tonight, we'll carry forward designs and explore that further. They need to do time studies where they're, looking at the rate of which cars are arriving and queuing and leaving the site to kind of really help us to understand how quickly this moves and clears out.
Yeah, I guess I'm not asking how quickly it moves on, I'm just wondering how many
vehicles
kids can be getting out of a car at one time. Do you know what I mean?
This seems wider, and so you could have maybe 6 to 8 cars level with the building and unloading at the same
But I think you
time,
don't
as
want
opposed
20
to.
doing it, right?
20 feels like a lot.
Center, there's a lot that can get out all at once.
Exactly, yeah.
Exactly.
Is there a limit on the number or?
I don't think so. I think it's how you kind of staff it, right? Because I know, and I guess to your point, Nicole, what I think we've learned over the years is to have as many options as possible, right? Which is great about this site with the parking on both the south and the north, and a bus loop and a car loop, and some options for making the car loop a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. At Gardner Elementary, which we just finished, we came in with a plan on how the whole parking was and it changed week 2. And they decided that what worked best for them was having a group of 20 cars come up at once, all unload, all leave, the next group of 20 cars came up, and they had to staff it and figure it out and change some of the signage a little bit, but that's what worked for them. And so, I think that flexibility is
Nicole.
Can I ask, it looks like with all of these right now, the buses go in the front and the cars all going in the back. How does that impact your sort of desire for everybody to be entering in one point?
It would be, no, so I would have the front of the building would just be my kids from the buses. The buses would have its own entrance and exit.
Okay.
There are not a lot of kids on each bus usually either. But the big thing is right now at Williams, the bus shows up at Carline, and it is very hard. And then at the end of the day, it is trying to back in sometimes while God bless that driver for being able to do that in front of everybody. But that would be eliminated here, which would be great. And again, I would not let any other kids in that way unless you're a bus kid. And we already know we do that currently at Williams in the morning.
The other thing I just want to say is what we're not showing tonight, we have 30 pencil sketches back in the office of us drawing loops around the site, and to exit the bus, kids are getting off on the right side, and to your point, car drop off too, you want them off on the passenger side. So how do you enter the site and do that? And then, so we came up with all kinds of schemes where you come on the left and loop around and do a figure eight and come back down, but then you're also tying off the building, right, and isolating the building. And so we really wanted to try and keep site safety in mind and also try and keep that building tied to the exterior the best that we could, especially at that northwest corner where that opportunity really presents itself. And so our original idea was that we would come with 5 very, very different site layout designs tonight. And by the time we spent a day on it, we realized there's minor options, but it's really kind of one approach.
I realized that Williams is a unique site, so I apologize if the question doesn't make sense, but the most parking of all 3 was option 3 with 240 spaces. Have you found with other projects that communities go with less parking, and is there a disadvantage to having more parking?
Let me clarify that when we tried to estimate with the district tried to estimate how much parking they would need, the number was 180, which felt low to us. So we've tried to stretch that because typically as a project proceeds, there's more and more anxiety about parking. At the same time, overall, every town is different based on how many families bike. The trend in society has been that more people drive their kids to school. Sadly, sustainably, it would be better if people bused again, but you do see that as a trend. So it's a constant dialogue. We have, to my knowledge, never had a school say, can you give us less parking?
Right. Yeah. Because you also want to think about after-school activities. You have concerts, you have parent-teacher conferences, you have all that type of stuff where you're going to be bringing in a large amount of people that are going to be parking instead of just dropping off.
And that's one of the advantages of putting a little more parking at the back, is that way we were really wary of putting too much parking on Williams, because Williams is a residential street and you don't want it to feel like a parking lot out there. The bus pull-off is shorter, and you only have 4 buses, so logically that's why we put it out there. If we put the buses to the back, they would just get caught up in the queue. So those 2 things went together, making it welcoming to visitors, put the visitors up there. But putting more parking to the back accommodates not only the school's needs, but also that surge that you would have for community use of the building. And so far, we've assumed that there's community use of the field and the building in some way, and making that possible. It's a little tough at this stage to know exactly how many cars the district is eager to see, and we didn't want to undercut it.
The reason for the question is if we have less parking, does that make for wider roads so that people were able to park on the side easier, or is it the same regardless?
Brian, do you want to talk about it's hard at this scale of plan to really understand the widths that you've anticipated, but this is a new construction?
Yeah, I think we're planning for standard roadway width, 24 feet wide, so we're not planning for additional lanes of pull-off or parking, which would probably just only add to the congestion if people are parallel parking or trying to pull off on the sides. Trying to move people in as quickly as you can and let them leave as quickly as possible. The whole left side of this, like as you make it through the loop in any scheme, could theoretically be safe drop-off. We've got a 8-foot pull-off lane that we're deeming or naming the actual drop-off. That's closer to the end of the school, as I mentioned, as you head back toward Williams. But there's no reason, the rest of the sidewalk around that loop couldn't accommodate drop-off as long as kids make their way to the main entrance. And that's okay with the school that happens. I'd also just like to say that each of these have a certain parking scheme associated with them, but you can, any parking scheme could go with any of the options that you see in terms of 2 bays, 1 bay, as you see them.
Yeah.
This one's great, as you mentioned, that the parking in the back, but it does have pretty significant impacts on the green space.
Yeah.
Like, we've got only a football field there, it's not a soccer field width, it's, your bleachers are mushed right up against it. We have to really look closely at what you're left with in this configuration. Whereas some of the other ones stretching the parking up into the extra green space at the top for sort of overflow parking, or if you actually need to get to closer to 200 spaces, but that offers a lot more green space otherwise. So there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of studies still that can be done on each of these, depending on feedback.
Marty, you have something?
Was in any of the sketches, was there any scheme where the roadway wrapped the entire campus?
Yeah, and I think that was one of the problems, is that really started to make the building feel isolated in the middle.
Yeah.
And also didn't tend to work with where you wanted the drop-off area to be. Ian, to your point on parking, the only other thing I would say is that parking is expensive, and the more parking you have, the more stormwater control you have.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up,
Which
too.
is also expensive. And
Yeah.
that's the part that kills me, because you spend all this money to put all these tubes underground, you bury them in dirt, and you never see them again. But
Yeah.
that's the downside.
We would hope to have the district keep looking at and exploring the parking max, because if we can bring this down to 200 and accommodate the need well, that would certainly improve the space around the field.
And we're meeting tomorrow at Police and Fire, so we have an opportunity to get some feedback from the chiefs.
Right, and DPW.
Yeah, DPW.
Talk about snow removal and such things. Yes. The only thing I'd want to add just about all of these, potential recommendations for us to think about is, I love how everybody's bringing the ideas, the input we have tonight, the feedback. As somebody who probably lived closer to a school than anybody else in this room, my yard to the back door of Center School was 40 feet. I've experienced everything everybody's talking about tonight. People parking in my yard saying, I'm just going to run in, I'll be right out. I have no idea who you are. I had to replace the driveway because we had the depression on the top of the driveway going down, so I understand that. I understand people going the wrong way. I understand not being able to get out of your yard for 20 minutes. I understand when Center School doesn't have a parking lot except for about 15 spaces in the back, so anytime there was parent-teacher conference or anything else going on, we'd have cars on both sides of the street. You can't get out of your driveway. So I am very sympathetic to what everybody's saying about what they're bringing to the table tonight. So from a mitigation perspective, we're not there yet. I get it. And I just want to make sure everybody understands that. Thanks for the input, because it really, really, really helps us inform and make more recommendations and move forward. It's not open for comment, I'm sorry.
Can I say something as well?
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the outside and the parking and the buses and the cars and all of that, but I just want to draw our attention back to the inside for a minute, because that's also really important to the community and the kids and the teachers and everybody. And I really am appreciating the thought that went into the different kind of sections of the schools because if the final decision is to combine both schools, still creating that community feel for the 6th grade, for the STEAM classrooms, for the media center, for the 7th and 8th graders then, because we know that's so important to Longmeadow, is that community feel within Glenbrook and Williams. So I think there's been a lot of attention to detail in that we haven't really acknowledged or touched on tonight. And so I would like to bring that up just as a positive point, that all three of these options will allow our teachers, our admin, and our students to still feel welcomed and excited to learn in these spaces, which is ultimately, those are our customers, those are our clients. So that's what we really want there.
Anybody
I have
else?
a question about that.
Julie?
Which I totally agree. On option B, do you all feel like that is not quite as, I thought you were saying something that made it sound like it's not quite as good for
Yes.
this. Yeah. Do you wanna?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're probably more expert in this than I am, but it looks like it doesn't do that quite as well.
It doesn't quite, to me, it doesn't quite have that kind of cozy neighborhood feel. Yeah. You're right, Julie.
Yeah.
Thank you. Like options A and C definitely bring that more to the front and center. But I think, Dora, you kind of touched on that as well, that it was kind of not quite
Yeah.
loving it just yet. Yeah.
Yeah, we can evolve schemes and keep
Right.
evolving them, but
Right.
I think if you go to the next slide, the reason, part of why it is these are much bigger buildings than housing projects, and you need that articulation of the differences in order to
Yes.
create some of that logical outdoor connection and bring some of that
Right.
relationship in. So, so in this one, and maybe the first one a little bit as well, I was curious to get your reaction to not just the site in terms of the parking, but actually how it might be useful to the
Right.
school. And in that one, in both of these, you have a fairly generous outdoor area east and west of the school that creates a kind of a safe courtyard. We were aware of the fact that the courtyard at Williams has value, but wasn't appreciated and was hard to maintain. So we're trying to create outdoor spaces that could be useful to teachers, that could push the road away from the school.
Blacktop play areas would be incorporated into the outdoor areas that are represented here?
Yeah, so in this one, you have a kind of a working side where the word new school exists. That's on the STEAM side. And then on the other side is a bit quieter, probably a little bit prettier. So we're imagining a STEAM work, a more active side, and the other that might be more play and trees and kind of good light. Whereas the gym and CAF are going to go straight out to outdoor play area that's closest to the cafeteria. So we kind of, the way currently the schools operate, particularly Glenbrook, there's multiple areas where students go when they go outdoors for any break on their own. So we wanted to create more than just one space.
Could we go, yeah, Marty, on this one, just for instance, what do folks think about, like, we have the two classroom wings on the south, if we swapped one of the classroom wings with the cafeteria wing, for instance? That idea of grouping the community spaces together versus grouping the classroom spaces together versus kind of dispersing the large spaces and the small spaces. Do you guys have thoughts or feelings on?
I like the way it's currently represented, but
Yeah.
I think it requires more thought, I'd say.
Yeah.
I like this
First
one
impressions.
for two reasons. I'm big on line of sight. I like to be able, so if I'm walking down any of these, I'm able to see, I like the kids to know that I can see them whenever I want to. But the other thing is, right now, the way we have classrooms right by our auditorium and our cafeteria, and it gets loud and it gets distracting, and this would feel a lot better, as well as on a rainy day, kids are coming in. I have a large space at the back where they're getting dropped off that I can keep them safe. Again, I'm constantly thinking of safety, but I'm also thinking of distractions. So I like this one the best out of the three for those reasons.
Question about all three of them. The spaces in the middle, are those be like pass-throughs? We have doors on both sides, or a door on one side?
You're talking about
In the middle of the corridors, the
the
smallest-
knuckles, or between the corridor and the,
Like, no, all the way, like, on the south side. There's the 5 smaller rooms in the middle.
Oh, that are landlocked.
right. Some of them are actually, those are,
Yeah.
if he was correct in pointing at them?
There's not.
Oh, no, yeah, okay, great, thank you for bringing this up. I can pull up a diagram, but I'll use as reference the high school, so, which we're in. You go down in the high school, and we actually appreciated that this town appreciates the way that's organized, such that you have classrooms, you have a teacher planning room and small group rooms that are central. They don't get outside light, but there's an advantage to where they are in that you're not in them very long, but it creates that access to the classrooms. And then that larger yellow area outside of that becomes open shared space, project space that the classrooms can enjoy, and we can bring light down from above into that space. So we can bring daylighting into the academic wing. So it's broader than a sort of a single corridor, double-loaded corridor, intentionally to create more community. And in this case, we're trying to kind of like fatten the bar so that we to take advantage of that in this site that is otherwise fairly narrow, so that we can, circulate around the building. But, yeah.
Another question, just about in terms of like the school safety piece, like how do you think about like having the main entrance and then the classrooms like right off the main entrance? How do you, like, what are the design features that kind of
There's a lot to be done still, but like typically, you're going to have a set of doors that actually separate that. And if, again, if this general concept is worth exploring, we're kind of moving from here because of the, how much tighter do we want to congest the bar, like tighten it, we can still explore that. We can explore how we're arranging the admin. But yeah, typically you kind of want some sound separation of the academic wing from the main corridor anyway. And what we have been thinking about is whether you want that to be a space you flow around something into the academic wing or whether it's like a central doorway in. We just exploring that. So we'll, as we did originally, as we explore, we'll kind of go back to the administration and the teachers and explore why this may or may not be good. There's a lot of what we call core space that's not really shown yet, right? Where are the bathrooms, and where are the custodial rooms. So this is more just diagrammatic, really.
All right.
So again, these were the site and building ideas that we were interested in your reaction to. I'm going to just read through this to be sure that we've listened to you and heard some response. So it seems like we're hearing a positive reaction to separation of parent and bus drop-off. The entry from the south, southeast, north, or 2 points was a question, and it sounds like that primary entry is most critical, but obviously there are, other ways in, other ways out. The three-quarter loop around the school as a whole is something that we'll be talking about with the fire department, but we wanted to be sure that we have access to all three quarters, which is a standard requirement, but then that's allowing some natural buffer in one direction. And I'm curious if anybody had any negative or positive reaction to that.
Josh, do you have some?
Like the land.
Yeah, that we didn't encircle the school entirely with the road.
I think because we saw in like the early plans, there was some going around the field and stuff, and I like this. I think this is much better if we can make it work. I get the idea of having the more looping the better, but I don't want to have the field with a road around it if we can avoid it. I think this is much better.
Parking organization, it sounds like the idea of more of the parking being to the north is going over well. Flow into and out of Williams, obviously there's a lot more to be explored there. And the revised Woolworth connection is a big question for us. So I heard concerns about having that connection, and I think we should bring back options that show no connection. And I can imagine the ways in which that will have a lot of advantages on site, and then we need our traffic team to look at that impact and give us more information about that and the timing on these things.
What the DPW.
Yeah, and I was just going to say
fire
that.
company
I
said
think
when you
before
meet
we
with them tomorrow.
go off
Yeah.
making any changes to the plan, we should probably get
Right.
that input together.
Yeah, I think that would be part of the conversation tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right.
I would think it has to be open for emergency access.
Yeah.
If it's
Yes, I
open,
agree.
People are going to go there.
Right.
So we have to we should account for it. I mean, I totally see what you're saying, Nicole,
Yeah.
but if it's open,
Yeah.
people are going
Is-
to use it. Let's
Make it safe.
make sure we're doing it right, yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, they may come back to us and they want to be like Quinnetuck, right? With gate that's accessible, they've got the key for, but can get through.
Well, yeah, we'll have to.
Yeah,
have a
I
town
know.
meeting for that.
I know, I understand. I'm just saying, I'd love to get the fire department and police department
Yeah,
input on
for
this,
sure.
yeah. Oh, and DPW, sorry.
The outdoor spaces around the school, I heard comments about that and the connection to the field. So, and then the building ideas, community spaces grouped together. Generally
Yes.
liking that idea.
Yeah, I think this the separate entry community space is probably something to explore.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the auditorium versus cafetorium, we only lightly touched on, but it sounds like with multiple schemes or every scheme, we should explore both of those to see that? Okay, great.
I'd love to get some of us out to see cafetoriums or
Yeah.
gymatoriums.
Right.
They're hard to evaluate unless you really see
Yeah,
them.
yeah, and we have one not far in Granby that's a gymatorium, and I think in Gardner is a cafetorium. So. Loading dock and service, and that was just to show that separation, which I doubt anybody would be opposed to. You can see in some schemes, based on how it's arranged, that's a shorter loop or a longer loop up and that has an impact. And then, yeah, the variation of where we're positioning CAF, gym, and auditorium in relation to each other. And then it sounds like you all are starting to see the same considerations we are to circulation, daylighting, and the outdoor connections. So thank you.
In the interest of time, can we go into the geothermal?
Yeah.
There's some slides here on the community survey that's still open, so if members of the public are watching, that opportunity is still there.
So to queue up the geothermal conversation, and I hope that George is available and can join us. George is our mechanical engineer from Ellen, and they are really expert in New England on geothermal. And we brought this up in the PDP and talked about that as an option for our heat and cooling impact, and as the new stretch code, and specifically in this community, there's going to be a lot of pressure on this being an all-electric school. So what are the options available to us for renewable energy? So George is here to answer a lot of those questions that you all had, and I'm sure we'll have more conversations, but this is a deep dive. George, are you there?
All right. I am here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Fantastic. It's my time to shine with speaking out on geothermal. All right, yeah, so, just high level, just wanted to go over kind of heat pumps and geothermal and, really answer any questions about the technology and why we think it's a great fit for the project. So just general background, kind of heat pump 101. What are heat pumps? Heat pumps are a mechanical piece of equipment that are used for heating and cooling, and they use the refrigeration process to transfer energy between sources and loads. You may be familiar with like air source heat pumps, which use the air as the source of extracting heat or rejecting heat, and conventional kind of water source heat pumps, which use a boiler to add heat to this water loop or cooling tower to reject the heat. Ground source, similar, except it uses the ground as that source of rejecting heat or adding heat. So that constant, 50-degree ground temperature, which is pretty perfect for the refrigeration process we use for HVAC, which makes it super efficient. So the benefits of the ground source versus air source is that, like I said, that consistent ground temperature, it doesn't matter if it's 0 degrees out or if it's 100 degrees out. It's always kind of seeing that constant, really efficient temperature, where air source, one of the downsides that when your biggest demand for cooling or heating, you have the worst efficiency of those heat pumps. So, we model these systems all the time, and geothermal always wins out as the most efficient operationally every time. So we can move on to the next slide here. Heat pump benefits, this is air source as well. They are the most efficient way to heat and cool a building. They do allow for simultaneous heating and cooling. They allow for energy sharing, which is pretty important for a building like this. There's a lot of internal gains, but you can use some of the heat rejection for cooling to heat domestic hot water for kitchens, etc. So there's a lot of opportunities to share that energy, which is only helps you out from an efficiency standpoint. So kind of a nice, a great way to use this technology for this building. High coefficient of performance versus fossil fuels. And again, that's because that energy transfer, you're not actually like burning a finite piece of fossil fuel or creating, one-to-one electricity to heat. These coefficients are 4 or 5 to 1. So every unit of energy you put in, you can get 5 out, and that's because you're literally transferring energy from one place to another, not like creating energy, if you will. And it allows for net zero building if you have, renewable energy implemented. So a couple different technologies, closed loop geothermal is basically you drill a borehole in the ground, you put some tubing down there, you fill it with grout, and you're literally using the earth as your heat exchanger. So there's no contact with any water. You're just pumping water down and up, and that's your exchange with the earth. So that's you're using that 50-degree kind of earth to, again, extract heat from the earth or reject heat when your loop gets too hot or cold. Open loop, similar, but you actually are using an aquifer, so you're actually pumping water out through a heat exchanger, and then injecting it back into the same aquifer. So that water itself is actually the heat exchange method. So some pros for closed loop, no contact with groundwater, so no worry about that. It's usually very low maintenance. The downsides are it does cost more because you need more boreholes for that exchange. Open loop pros are usually less wells because it's based on the amount of water for your heat exchange. So pros of that is yes, you can have a cheaper system, but cons are you have to worry about the water management of that system, and you have to have water on site. Let's see. Next slide again. So system selection, we're kind of talking about new buildings, but also existing buildings. We essentially we look at what's there. Heat pumps in general operate at a lower hot water temperature. So when we're talking about like a retrofit that may be designed for like a 180-degree boiler, we really have to take that into consideration. Obviously, a new build, that's not as much of a consideration, but we do want to assess if there is something that can be reused, can it be reused with this technology. We always model these buildings, which we will for this project. Basically, an energy model is kind of taking an hourly load of your building from an energy perspective, so how much it's heating and cooling, and then how much your building operationally uses. So whether that's power, there's probably fossil fuels, obviously, but and water. So we kind of put this all in a model based on occupancy and spit it out, and then kind of make decisions based on that model. And we use that to tune the building envelope and also select our HVAC systems. We assess the area requirement. This site has plenty of area, just high level. There should be no issue with the geothermal system fitting on the site. We do like to review the site geology, and this is what we do with the test well, which we will probably talk about a little later here. But that test well does help understand how much casing is required, basically the amount of soil before you hit bedrock. And then if there's water, I do know that there is water around Long Meadow, so there's actually a lot of water within the site, based on wells in the area. Obviously, we want to verify that. And then we do like life cycle cost analysis to make sure that including incentives and everything to make sure that we're putting money in the right place, right? This is taxpayer money. We want to make sure that we're investing in the right technology and in the right, low maintenance solutions, and just give you the data to make the right decisions. Next slide, I guess here. Just want to show, this is like just a high level, like we talked about everything on, but basically, this particular kind of chart here shows 6-7 different options of different mechanical systems and how they fare with operational costs. So again, this is just showing that we make decisions based on data. This design team is not just, this seems like a good idea. This is real data, give you the information so that everyone can make the best decision for the project, energy goals and budget. Again, this is just some things to consider. When we talk about electrified technology in general, we really, an envelope is very important. This is more for some existing buildings, but because you obviously have to meet code for these newer builds, but demand control, ventilation, energy recovery, air sealing on any existing building, improving insulation. The envelope is the most important to reduce the overall load before we implement any of this technology. So this is just kind of an advocate for the architect here to help us out on our mechanical side with having, good envelopes. Incentives rebates. So what's really exciting now, we've done a lot of geothermal systems for schools and municipalities, but there's kind of a bonus that happened about a year ago now with the Inflation Reduction Act, which I'm sure many are aware of. But basically, it allows tax-exempt entities and municipalities to take advantage of what was a credit that only residential and commercial, for-profit folks could take advantage of. So this is a 30% credit towards your geothermal system, and there's some creative ways to maximize the incentives, but in general, you know, we really would like to, you know, take advantage of the 30% credit. There's other bonus kickers that, you know, use all domestic content. Really offers a great savings to the project. Every project we've done with these credits beats out any other HVAC system. So, you know, this is just a great, you know, from the IRA is a great way to promote geothermal. And then also Mass Save, $4,500 a ton for geothermal systems, also huge savings for a geothermal system. So not only are you getting the most efficient system you can for heating and cooling, with these rebates, you're going to get the most economical system up front as well. And yeah, so you know, next steps, you know, we really would like to promote. We have a proposal for a test well, which is drilling a well, looking at how much overburden you have, if there's water, doing a conductivity test, which allows us to put that into our energy model to fine-tune the borehole field, so we're not over-designing something. You know, geothermal does have a cost, obviously, so we don't want to have just, you know, add boreholes just for the sake of adding boreholes. We do need to tune this thing up. So yeah, the test well determines whether the site has water. Could you use an open loop system? Always an option. So if we do find water, sometimes we do a capacity test or we yield test to see how much water that well can produce, and then we'd actually do an inflow test. So we get a hydrant and actually inject water back into that well to see if it can accept that water. And again, casing, these are all kind of things that we just want to look at to see basically how to optimize that borehole field to, you know, to minimize costs, but also make sure you have the right capacity. So that was a lot thrown at everybody, but any questions?
Nicole.
I just have one. I know you talked about the cost differences sort of out of the gate for closed versus open loop. Are there higher maintenance costs / likelihood of repair with one over another? I see Nick nodding, so I'm guessing the answer is yes.
Yeah. So we like usually, like for example, after 15 years, you know, it's a well pump. So at some point you're going to have to replace it. It's you know, it's just like any residential well pump. It does fail, but so do you know. There's also obviously pumps required for the internal hydraulic system as well. So those also fail. But the main thing I would say is just the water quality and making sure you have the right injection. You know, you have capacity in injection, and that these heat exchangers don't foul up over time. So like if you have bad water quality, it's possible that you can have fouling of heat exchangers, which just means you have to clean them. You know, we've had sites that haven't cleaned them for 15 years, and they're fine. You know, you have controls to monitor this stuff, but that is what we've seen is if you don't have heat exchangers at all, people have designed systems like that, where you actually then that kind of fouls your actual heat pump loop, which is not good. We separate that hydraulic loop with a heat exchanger. So really, there is a little more maintenance, but you know, the design inherently kind of limits that, but you do have potential more operational costs if it's not designed right. Like if you have a lot of pressure, more pressure it takes to inject into the ground, you could see more costs on the open loop side versus the closed loop. So it's just, these are design decisions that, you know, we want to make sure they're robust systems. We're not going to give you a system at the end of the day that is hard to maintain, but there are things to consider. But we always do redundant heat exchangers in open loop systems so that if one goes down, you can always operate the system on the other one. We implement some auto back flushing occasionally, depending on what the water quality looks like. So, in general, they're both very low maintenance, but it also matters, you know, how do you design them.
Are there differences in the incentives and rebates, or are they the same for both?
No, they're applied to both.
Okay.
Josh.
What happens if it's below 28 degrees?
I was wondering the same thing, Josh.
And 32 for the open.
What's that?
What happens if it's below 28 degrees?
You said operating temperatures on your slide between 28 and 90 degrees, was it?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's just typical. So the 28 is actually water temperature, so you actually can go down to like 20, but so the boreholes themselves, that heat pump loop, those heat pumps can extract heat below 28 degrees. it's just in general, we keep that water loop. It's not the outdoor air temperature, it's the water loop that is being circulated down to the ground and back. So basically, I'm just saying that the 50-degree kind of ground temperature, as you cool a building, it actually heats up the ground. And as you heat the building, it's extracting the heat from the ground, so it cools down. So when we like design these systems, that's just a standard operating range. Usually we actually like to keep it between 35 and 75, 85, but those are just kind of operational range of that geothermal loop, not the outdoor air temps, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So basically, if you don't have enough boreholes, what will happen is that your loops will, you will either have really high temps or really low temps, and those will trip your heat pumps. Your heat pumps are limited on the water side to, I think it's like 20 to 120 degrees. They don't operate efficiently, obviously, at that temperature, so we like to keep it. We size borehole fields, like I said, between 35 and 75, 85 degrees. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Any other questions?
Well, George, you were
Lori?
saying that the efficiency of geothermal over air source heat pump is much greater. Are there any other reasons why you advocate for geothermal over air source heat pump?
Yeah, the new refrigerant standard is one. It's going to be very difficult for large VRF type systems just because of the new, basically, regulations on concentration of gas if there's a leak in the system for where you're running these pipes. So that's one thing. Two, refrigerant piping is going to leak. It's going to happen. So when you have these big VRF systems, inherently they're going to leak, and it's tough to find them. It's tough to fix them when they do leak. And also just flexibility. It's really hard to add a zone to a refrigerant, high pressure refrigerant piping unless you don't plan for it. So, I just like to have that flexibility. Hydraulic piping, that's all. It's just like an old boiler loop or anything. Everyone knows how to work on it. You can solder it, you can do a pro press. It's just very easy to add zones and maintain. And that's why we just like these systems. There's very low maintenance systems, and we've had great luck with them. We're designing right now a 250,000 square foot high school. We just finished a year ago a 180,000 square foot middle school, and all geothermal. So we've done these systems, designed these systems, and we've had great feedback. And this was before the incentives even were available.
Marty?
Do we need to authorize the well test, or is that included in existing design services?
We already did that, right?
Yeah, that's
That's
through the
already-
reimbursable budget that we have.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the proposal for that was lower than we expected. That was
Gotcha.
good as well. And so that will validate whether or not the soil conditions and the ground source conditions are appropriate and useful, but we'll continue to, compare and provide life cycle analysis of that as well as the air source heat pump before you have to make any decisions.
So, should the test come back not positive, I want to say, then what you're saying that if it wasn't viable, air source isn't a possibility then?
No, it is.
Oh.
Anything is possible. It's just
Okay.
there's things to consider, right? There's build cycle costs, it's maintenance, and install costs, and then your operating costs. So anything, we could do an air to water heat pump, which is basically a big chiller that can produce hot and chilled water. There's a lot of electrified technologies out there. You just don't, a lot of these you don't get those incentives that you would with geothermal. So if you take into account those incentives, not only, like I said, is it the best operationally and maintenance-wise, it's a lower initial cost, which is kind of what we're going for, obviously. So if it could work, and usually, again, the soils itself, it's not like it's not viable. It's just, it could be costly if you need 300 feet of casing for each borehole. Sometimes it gets a little cost prohibitive. You can still make it work. You just may need, it just may be expensive. So that's where, for some reason, if the test borehole isn't favorable, or for some reason there's like very low connectivity. Those are the areas where, you know, the technology can work. It's just at what point does it not make sense from an initial cost standpoint? So those are the things we want to check just to make sure. High level, again, I've looked in the area. I know where wells are. I don't know what the connectivity of they are, but I feel positive about it. It's just, geology can change from 20 feet away. So, we just want to make sure we're covered.
Great. Any other questions?
George, can you talk a little bit about the timing of the IRA incentives? Right. I mean, we have to think about, in terms of the MSBA funding, we would need to increase our budget at the beginning because the IRA incentives come in after the project is complete, correct?
Yeah, so you have to have the systems up and running, and then you fill out a form with the IRS for an elected pay, and then they send you a check. But so you have to have that bridge money until you get that check, right? And then, that check can be, that check can be used for something like solar or something further, or you just put it back into the budget, I guess, would also be an option. But there is that initial money that you would have to account for sure.
So, does anybody know what the timing is on that? Like, is it in time for this project? Like, the IRA money seems to me like it'd be sunsetting before this project is done to get reimbursed for it. Is it like, do you have to start it? Do you have to have it completed? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, the IRA is supposed to be for another 9 years before you even start saving up. But I mean, I guess things could change. Who knows what's going to happen? But that's what's happening. It's supposed to be. It was 10 years. Obviously, we're a year out, and so it's 9 years, and then it starts phasing out. So I don't think the funding will be an issue for this project, unless something with the administration changes or something that.
Ian, was that what you were going to say?
Armin, I just wanted to comment. I just got back from a conference where CLA, one of the large regional accounting firms, was giving a presentation on ARPA funds, and their explanation was this is going to affect till at least 2033. Now, one of the questions you had about timelines, I want to just mention to everyone that because the town would look to do a tax-exempt bond for this type of project, there would be a potential of a reduction of the overall credit that we would receive. So that's something that we want to keep in mind. There's a potential that it could be a 15% reduction, but it remains to be seen how much we would qualify for in total.
Thanks, that's great information. Great, anybody else? Questions? Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Thanks, George. All right, moving on to our next agenda item then, just talk about the community forum we're having next Tuesday night. Marty stated it at the beginning. Next Tuesday night was 7 to 8:30 at the Adult Center. Should be in the auditorium over there?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Presentation space.
Presentation space.
Yeah.
So we do have, did everybody get this, or is this, I don't think we need to go through it, everything, but I just wanted to give everybody the heads up that basically want to we've done a forum already where we did background and people giving us the input. We are going to keep on this cadence of community involvement, making sure that the information's out there, everything's on the website, like I said. Everything has been on LCTV except for one meeting, I think, so far, maybe two. And then from an agenda point next week, just talking about why the project. Adam will be going through the process. We'll talk a little bit about what we're talking tonight on the PDP, which again, PDP is available on the website. Glenbrook versus Williams, why the narrowing occurred, talking about what's our next steps, ways to reduce cost, input, and then talking about the finality of the timeline. Is there anything you guys, anybody from the committee, want to add to the forum or questions or thoughts? The thought was we were going to do it more in of a roundtable type atmosphere, just a casual conversation as opposed to a presentation out. And again, have LCTV attend if possible to, and I think we already have that online, to make sure that this gets into the library of videos and that people can look at them if they're not able to be there or participate offline. And then Dory and probably we should get together either tomorrow after our other meeting or Friday or Monday beforehand, just to make sure we're coordinated. Any thoughts, sirs? Great.
Can I just
Oh.
say one thing that
You
I've
can.
been watching the presentation today, and I don't know whether it's something we want to raise, but I feel like I've talked to a couple parents about it, just reminding people what it's like for how we're thinking about current students in all of this, especially as we're looking at these different layouts that like the old building is kind of disappearing under the new building, but we're still thinking about what that's like for students.
Yeah, no, and I think a big part of that, when we're talking about sites too, and a lot that we were discussing why one site versus another, we didn't want to put them in trailers that, quite frankly, will cost us millions of dollars and we don't get reimbursed for them. So I agree with you. We need to make sure that the children, understand. And I know they had a lot of input into the educational plans and the solution and the visioning and all that, but yeah, great point. Anybody else? Yeah,
No, I did have
Julie.
one more question, sorry.
Go ahead.
This is like the first week after school ends, and there are a lot of people who kind of take off during this week. What's the best thing you can tell people about like why they should come to this meeting, or if they miss this meeting, what's the next opportunity to hear about?
Yeah, I think what we tried to do is, one, find a date that we could advertise as much as possible for. Lynn did a great setup down at the election with the QR codes and the getting information out there on there, and hopefully trying to catch people before they do take off. I know different people do. I mean, people are gone, some people are leaving, but but there will be many more opportunities. So I would expect as we progress through the summertime on this table, this journey of discovery and what are the options and taking all this input into them and changing them, that we'll probably have another one right when we get back to school, is what we discussed, having another forum just like this. So regular cadence, probably every other month or every couple months, knowing that July and August probably aren't the best time to have these, yes. Anything else? So next step, we'll have a meeting for the 6/18, and we'll make sure it gets out. And then we have our meeting tomorrow with public safety and DPW, which will inform even more. And then our next meeting will be our regular meeting. And just so everybody knows, this meeting tonight was 6:30 is not standard. We usually meet at 6 o'clock, but it was adjusted to accommodate me, so thank you very much. The next meeting will be at 6 p.m. the second Wednesday of the month. So, anybody else, next steps? Okay. If not, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
There's a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second, is there any discussion? Seeing none, a call for a vote, Ed?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Julie? Chris? Nicole?
Yes.
Marty?
Yes.
Armin, yes. We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody, for being here, and congratulations to Mr. Levine.
Yes, congratulations. Armin, sure.